Welcome to another episode of DD on the Spot. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Johnson. And before I get to our guest today, I'd like to remind everyone that if you enjoy this content, to please give a like and subscribe down below. I'd greatly appreciate it. We have Gina Palma on the podcast. She's a wife, mother, as well as a fire meteorologist, which that's the first time I've ever heard those two words put together. So we'll figure out what that's all about. So that's another interesting thing about our guest. And she's coming to us all the way from Nevada, where if it isn't 150 degrees, I don't really think you're really actually in Nevada. But she's also an NPC figure competitor. She's 2 times nationally qualified overall winner, and she's also a fitness instructor. But most importantly, she's our current guest. Gina, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, now to get it out of the way, what's the weather like in Nevada today?
It is, well, it's warm, but not as hot as you would imagine. I live up in Reno, so I'm not down in southern Nevada. So it's like, low to mid 90s. We're supposed to have some thunderstorms today, so I'm excited for that finally. But it's not bad. It's hot, it's dry. No humidity. That's the big thing is I'm from Chicago, if you didn't already see that. So since you're from Minnesota, I had to throw on my Bears shirt. Um, but anyway, we have no humidity, so it's really comfortable compared to the Midwest.
Yeah, well, actually, it's perfect weather here today, but it's been, like 90s and 80s, all throughout like this last month. But we had a really big rainstorm this morning, so now it's like 75 degrees and it's absolutely perfect out. We're like, my skin tone, this is the weather to go out and, do stuff. Otherwise, I'd be burnt to an absolute crisp either ways. But I do have to mention everyone out there, I'm not going to lie, I don't really care that much for the Bears. Not saying that I don't, I don't like them, I don't hate, but it's just because for Vikings fans, all we really care about is hating the Packers. That's the one. So that's the one thing that we share with Bears fans. So,
That's what we have in common.
yeah,
Yes.
because when they play the Bears, I really don't hate the Bears. It's I want the Vikings to win, obviously, but it's like I'm not going to be like, oh, screw the Bears. But yeah, I hate the Packers so much that it really doesn't matter. And whenever I have Packer fans on here, I got to do a little asterisk and be like, everyone, they might be a little mentally challenged, so just go along with it. But yep, that's our.
It's slower.
Well, that goes, and they're drunk half the time too that they're on the podcast too. So but again, that's to be expected for people from Wisconsin. So you get what you get what you pay for. But obviously you are a jack of a lot of trades, being a fire meteorologist. Before we get into your bodybuilding, what is that? Because when I saw that, I was like, okay, does she like predict if fires are going to happen, or like what's that?
Pretty much. Yeah, I'm a meteorologist, so I actually went to Purdue, which is over in the Midwest too. And I worked for an airline. I've worked for the National Weather Service, and then I moved over to another branch of the federal government. So I work in wildland fire. And if you're not from out west, I wasn't a big BLM Forest Service land fan. We didn't have a lot of it in Chicago, but that's basically who I work for is the land agencies, and I predict weather and fire potential for the entire Great Basin, which is Nevada, Utah, Idaho. So basically telling them this is what the weather's like. This is where we're expecting problems with large fires, and this is where we're expecting problems with spread. So telling them, kind of trying to guide them where to move resources to in advance. So a lot of weather, a lot of fire, which is fun.
Which is nothing that I've ever had to deal with in Minnesota, and a lot of people in the Midwest, we don't ever have to deal with that. Where, I always like to compare it to how people, usually out west, they don't have to ever deal with tornadoes. That's one thing that's like a lot more Midwest. So it's very different. But I do have to ask before we get into bodybuilding too, how does one predict a fire? Does it just depend on the temperature and the dryness? Because I feel like that's something that would be kind of hard unless there's basically like someone with a flint out there trying to start a forest fire.
I just basically roll dice and we go from there. No, but yeah, it's a lot of things. It's temperature, it's weather, it's fuels, like how dry the fuels are, how much grass we have out there. It's just so many different things, and we sort of put all that together and decide, okay, conditions are really ripe in these areas. If we get lightning, that's our biggest problem out here is just dry lightning starting fires. But we do have human problems as well. Not as much in Nevada. We don't have a big population. In a lot of spots, so it's mostly lightning. But yeah, it's just kind of looking at the weather and sort of how hot and dry we've been and kind of go from there.
Well, you answered it perfectly, because I would say if you were to ask anyone in the general public how meteorologists come up with their guests, a lot of people would be like, oh, they probably just roll the dice and they just guess. Yeah, I always say that's the one profession where you can be wrong more than you can be right, and you'll still get paid for it. Yeah.
Absolutely, we joke about that all the time.
Yeah, well, yeah, at least they have a sense of humor about it. So that's
Yeah.
and I've always been fascinated by that, predicting weather and stuff. But Minnesota, if you get it right 1/10 of the time, you're a star here, because we have the most bipolar weather ever. But before we get into that, because that's a whole podcast in and of itself that I could go 10 hours of winter weather stories up here, where it's insane. But why don't you give us your backstory on what inspired and what motivated you to get in shape, and how that led to being a figure competitor, and how that is currently where you're at right now?
Well, I've always been, even when I was younger in high school, I was always into something active. I played soccer, I played softball, I was on the dance team. Like I was always doing something actively. And then that kind of continued into college. I always exercised. I always worked out. I was never a big weightlifter, and my nutrition was always terrible. So finally, probably like after I had my two daughters, I had them in my early to mid 30s, and then after that I was like, you know what, I just want to get back in shape. I was never super overweight, but I was always just kind of like maybe a little skinny fat, just didn't really have a lot of definition, and I was kind of over it. And so in early 2018 I kind of joined a Beachbody group and decided to kind of go through Beachbody just to get myself what I thought was in shape. And it was the first time in my life I ever really followed a meal plan. Like, never watched my protein. I'm a carb lover. I could live on anything carb related. My protein intake was probably less than 50 grams a day. It was just ridiculous. And so that was the first time I finally and I got super lean. I was tiny. And then that kind of brought me back. That kind of brought me towards how I got into bodybuilding, is because kind of on the tail end of that, as I was getting leaner, I'd be taking these classes at the gym, and my now coach, Shelace, she was the instructor, and that's how I met her. And I was always just fascinated with her body. I was like, wow, like she got so much muscle definition. She looks amazing.
I had to get her to
So,
move back on the camera because
yeah.
her arms were taking up too much of the camera, where I was literally like,
Oh yeah.
"Okay, yeah, yeah, it's ridiculous."
Yeah. Shoulders out to here. Like, it was unbelievable. So I always I always just admired her anyway. And then as I was taking her class, she kept mentioning to me, she's like, you are so close to being on stage. And I was like, you're effing crazy. Like, there is no way in a million years that, because I'm looking at her, she's an IFBB figure pro, and I'm like, I look nothing like you. I'm like half the size, and I was lean. That was it. But she kept mentioning it, and I was like, and then I saw on Instagram or Facebook she had another competitor doing a show in August, and I was like, so I just kind of started following her, and I was like, maybe I should talk to her about it. And so we kind of sat down and talked, and it was about 6, 7 weeks out from the Tahoe show, which was in August. And after talking to her, I was like, well, I mean, if you think like I could be ready for this, and she's like, I think you could be ready. We kind of talked about a couple different shows. She's like, there's one in August, there's one in October. I'm like, I really don't want to wait till October. And she's like, well, then we can do this in August. And I said, okay, if you can promise me that I'm going to look like I belong up there. Like, I don't want to look like just somebody who, just lost a bunch of weight or, looks good. I'm like, I need to look like I belong. She's like, I promise you, you will look like you belong. I can't promise you're going to win, but I can promise you, you will look like you belong. I'm like, okay, let's do this. And we went through a very short prep. It was, compared to my other preps now, it's the most unusual prep, because all she did was feed me. Because she's like, you need carbs, you need food. Because I was eating, the program I was on was very low carb, not a lot of food. And so she's like, we just need to fill you up. And I was like, okay. So we did that, and I won first in my class and ended up competing for overall. I remember walking off stage, and I was like, what do I do? Like, I'm first in my class. I have no idea what to do. She's like, you need to take your medal off and you need to go back out there. I was like, okay. And then I got second overall. And from then I fell in love with everything about it. I'm an introvert by nature, or maybe an extroverted introvert, but I'm not an onstage person in barely any clothing, totally comfortable. So I, I just fell in love with everything about it, the process, the way my body changed in ways I could never have imagined, just everything. So I attribute all of my bodybuilding experience, anything, to Shalace, because without her approaching me, I didn't know anything about bodybuilding. I probably never would have sought it out on my own.
And that's awesome. And I'll leave a link to Shalace's podcast down below, because that was great. I'm going to have her on soon again. But, it's just fascinating talking to, I've had another guest that was on prior to you, where she was also done with, Shalace worked out with her. And yeah, it's just amazing what that's been like. But one of the questions that I love to ask everyone that's in the health and fitness realm when they first get started, because I always say, if you were to walk into a gym with 100 people, there's 100 different ways as to how those people got into shape, whether it comes down to their diet, their nutrition, how many reps they do, what exercises they do. So many little things add up to that overall package that people end up seeing. What was that experience like for you? Because if you were to walk up to someone and say, hey, what'd you train for this body part, it looks amazing, what works best for them 99% of the time isn't going to work as good for you. And it's all about just figuring out, through trial and error, what that's gonna take for you to get the best results.
For me, I mean, I just follow. I'm a really good rule follower in the well. My mom would maybe disagree, but in the realm of fitness, I'm really good. When someone tells me this is what you need to do, I just do it. Which is like I said, with Shalace, it's very easy. She looks at my body, she decides what we need to do, because I am nowhere near smart enough to figure out the road I need to be on, and like what my macros should be and what my workout should be. So I feel like I got really lucky in finding people who could look at my body and figure out what I needed to do that would work for me. because that's really all it is. I mean, people ask me all the time. I get stopped in random places. We were at the water park yesterday, and like besides all the weird looks you get, and I'm not even like super lean. Like I'm not, we're barely starting prep. So I mean, I'm like not even close to like closer to the stage when you really get the weird looks. But it's like people were like, "Oh my God, how do I get your arms?" And I'm just like, I don't know. I do what I'm told. Like that's it. To me, like a good coach and a good coach, trainer, whatever your goal is finding that person who knows where you want to be and then could tailor it to how your body works is huge. Just huge.
You should honestly just have like Shelace business cards with you, so then whenever someone asks you like how you get your arms, just here, give her a call. That's really the
Yeah,
reason. Yeah, yeah. I mean, and
yeah.
that's and we hear that a lot as well. But I love to talk genetics on the podcast because it's one thing, especially in this day and age where everyone's on social media. Everyone's looking at these photos of other people and saying, oh my God, like I want her arms, I want their abs, I want his back. People just don't understand that you can only be the best version of yourself. I mean, and anytime I can promote that, I will, just because we have so many times where, I mean, you don't know how that person got to that look. You don't know how they maintain it. I mean, you don't know the dedication that they have. I mean, maybe their food. I mean, there's just so many little things where if I were to say, hey, I want Rich Piana's arms or something like that, it's like, oh, that's not going to happen. It's just not. So, but I always love to ask because whenever someone first gets started, they always have that one body part that really, really takes off. And then they have that one body part that just legs behind it. They have to train to oblivion. I mean, I'll give you mine first. My back, just because I had jobs all throughout college of being in warehouses and lifting and loading boxes. And you either got a really nice back or you quit. But also being 6'3", my legs and my lower body are just shot where, I mean, I could train legs every single day. And like I said, I could inject pure muscle into my thighs and calves and they wouldn't gain an ounce. I mean, I don't know how that's possible, but what were those body parts for you when you were getting started?
Well, for me, I've always had bigger legs. Like, I mean, I grew up in the 80s and early 90s where, the icons for females were like Kate Moss and, Giselle Bundchen and all these skinny models. And I was like, and I had grown up striving for those things, but my legs were never going to cooperate with that model. So for me, my legs are easy to build. I'm quad dominant, probably playing soccer and doing some of those things, helped being younger doing that. But my legs definitely grow quickly. My shoulders seem to grow quickly. I have trouble with my back, so I feel like if you and I got together, boy, we'd be a powerhouse. For me, it's like my back thickness. I just feel like that's the part that, and my hamstrings, two big parts of my body that just are either resistant to grow or they're actually growing. Because I mean, if I look at my transition over the last 2 years, I've made huge improvements. So maybe not resistant, but not on my timeline. Like I want everything to be done, quick. Like let's get it all done and let's build it. But yeah.
Well, I do have to warn people. My back, a back day for me back in college when like I was at UPS and I started out, there'd be a trailer where let's say there'd be like 400 pieces of stuff that weighed at least 50 pounds a piece, and they'd tell me, yeah, you got like 2.5 hours to load all that stuff onto the thing. So it would just be constantly picking up 50 to 60 pound things, carrying them over and putting them on the thing. So, I don't know if that's for everyone, especially when it was like in the summertime and it was like 110 degrees in that trailer. Oh my God, I mean, I have stories that I could ruin UPS physically, basically, if I told my true stories. But I'm waiting to probably get a lawsuit and make a couple million. No, I'm just kidding, everyone. But that's really just the big development for me. But yeah, legs. I mean, yeah, I to this day, it's a never ending quest and it's never going to happen. But I love to talk myths and stereotypes on this podcast too. And we talked about this briefly before I started recording. It's gotten better the last 5 years due to Instagram, but there are still, unfortunately, so many women that still have that fear that if they walk into the weight room and they pick up one weight, they're going to put on 50 pounds of muscle overnight. And first of all, if that does happen to you, give me a call, because I would spend my entire life savings just to talk to you and train with you once, because you have found the secret that almost every guy is looking for and a lot of women are looking for too. Did you ever have that fear when you were getting started? Because I know that you were always healthy and active, but like you said, you never really did weightlifting. And even if you didn't have that fear, how do you like to respond to that now? Because I bet you hear that all the time from people.
I definitely had that fear because, with my body structure, I've always had a broad back, and my legs have always been bigger. My sister and I used to joke. My maiden name's Beninato. I'm Sicilian. We always used to joke, we got the Beninato thighs. It's like these giant tree trunks. And now I'm like, thank God, like thank you for my thighs. I didn't know I wanted these. So for me, I was fearful because I always thought, well, my legs are already big. My back's already at the time I thought big. Now I want it bigger. So I don't want to build it anymore. And the one thing I've learned starting bodybuilding is truly what weights do for you. Like you said, the myths, like it's not about getting bigger and giant. It's about transforming your body and changing the consistency of your body. You're changing your entire body structure. You're not just making everything bigger. So I think that fear was definitely in me at a young age. And I hear it from people all the time. Oh, I don't want to, I don't want to lift weights because the minute I start, I get really big. And I was like, I it's not true. I'm like, what you're feeling is, you're getting this blood rush, you're getting the water to build up. It's this, you're not really building it that quickly. Trust me. I said, I've been working for 2 years and I'm very new to bodybuilding. I started 2 years ago and I'm like, I've worked every day for 2 years, lifting for an hour and a half or longer every day, trying to build my body. And do you know how hard it is? Like, so I try to, address those questions when I get them. But I've learned just so much from this process. I think that's one of my, one of the things I'm most grateful with bodybuilding is learning about nutrition, learning about my body, learning about, exercise and what works and what doesn't. And just, I have a better understanding of what I can do and what works for me. So that's really been big.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I cannot stress enough like how impressive your transformation for just 2 years have been. I mean, we've had guests that have been on for 10 years and it hasn't been as much. So yeah, it takes so much time. And I say, especially for people in my generation in this day and age where everyone wants everything, tomorrow basically, or they want it yesterday, basically. This is not the sport to get into because you are not going to, I always like to compare, being a body or trying to lose weight and get in shape to being an alcoholic, where if you're an alcoholic and you take one day off from drinking, that's already a significant amount of progress. But if you work out for one day and go look in the mirror the next day, nothing's going to have changed. You're still going to look exactly the same unless you run for like 24 straight hours. Then yeah, you probably lost like 10 or 12 pounds, but other than that, you're not going to see those results. But one positive thing that I think impacts especially women so much more than men is just that confidence boost that working out gives you. I mean, we have heard hundreds of stories on this podcast of how it's changed people's lives and helped them for the better. How have you taken that confidence boost that working out's given you and used that to impact your life?
It's made my life a lot less stressful because I no longer, honestly, I don't care what people think of my body, which is huge. I mean, when I was growing up, that's all I did was care about, what people thought of me. I mean, I was overweight as a kid. I was teased as a kid, so I became very aware that my physical appearance was very important to other people. And what I've learned now is that it really isn't, that's not really my problem. Like how they view me and what they feel I look like to them is their business. And so removing that stress from my life has made everything more enjoyable. I work out the way I want to. I build my body the way I want to. I try to, show it as a positive thing. And, I no longer stress about things like the scale, which if Shelace is watching, she will be like, oh my God, rewind 2 years. And I wanted to kill her with the stupid scale. But like things like numbers don't really matter. It's about what your goal is and what I'm building for. And so I've removed a lot of the fluff of stress from my life. And like I said, what people think of me or what they say, or if I get comments, and part of it is maybe being a meteorologist. I kind of have a thick skin because I'm used to people coming up to me being like, why'd you blow the forecast? And it's like, well, oh well.
I had to
So
cancel my golf trip for that, and you were wrong. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, sorry. But yeah, it's removed a lot of stress and it's made me understand myself as a person. And it's also made me kind of understand what I can do, not necessarily what I can't do, because I try to do just about everything I can. But it just shows me how much power I have to achieve my goals and how much power I have to control the path that I get there. And that I think that is such a big thing with people to, stop the blame game. And it's not somebody else's fault that I didn't achieve this, or it's all on me. And I think that relieves a lot of the pressure off of other people maybe, but also that I take responsibility for everything I do, good or bad, bad outcome, good outcome. I take responsibility and then I try to make improvements. So it's just, yeah, it's changed how I look at myself and how I look at my life.
Absolutely. I mean, we've heard so many positive stories like that, and it's just amazing. But when you're talking about people coming up to you and asking about the weather and stuff, that always brings me back to one of my favorite Curb Your Enthusiasm episodes when, the weatherman predicts rain. So then Larry David cancels his golf thing, and then he goes there the next day and it's perfectly sunny out, and the weatherman's out there golfing with his friends, and he thinks that the weatherman did it on purpose. So that brought, I mean, yeah, I love that show. And yeah, I bet, I mean, that's one of those jobs too where yeah you're gonna get that. It's kind of like a professional athlete where like if you throw an interception you're gonna hear it from the fans and just be like, why did you? So yeah, I really do think that you really do need a thick skin. But one of the things that is not talked about as much as it should be when it comes to even just the healthy and fit lifestyle in and of itself, not just bodybuilding, is the nutrition. I mean, the vast majority of the general public does not realize that nutrition is, 80 to 90% of the results that you're going to see. You can work out, every single day and do it all perfectly. And if you don't have right nutrition, yeah, you might see some results, but it's not going to be nearly as much as you would see if with proper nutrition. What were some of the bigger nutritional changes that you made when you first started, really taking things seriously? Because I know, first of all, your protein was so low. Even when you told me it was like 50 grams, I was like, good God, how are you getting through the day? But what other changes did you really make nutrition wise when you first took things seriously?
Got everything. Well, I first in 2015, so about 5 years ago, I had a surgery. It was called Nissen fundoplication. I had really bad reflux. They basically rebuilt my digestive system, so I have a lot of trouble digesting food properly anyway. And so that was another thing that Shelace kind of had to deal with, was this weird aspect that most people don't have. But I could, like, when I went through that, I could only eat like 2, 3 ounces of something at a time. And I was on liquid diet for a month or two. So it was a really awful surgery. But since then, I can't eat large meals anymore, which was kind of a blessing in disguise, because it sort of pushed me right into this bodybuilding, because I eat, 6 times a day. And that worked really well with my lifestyle. So as far as nutrition, diet, if you want to call it, it was a perfect lifestyle for me, because I needed small meals. I needed to eat more protein, obviously, to build muscle. I needed to reduce maybe the carbs. The fat I was probably kind of about the same with, but it was a total restructure of my eating plan. And like I said, with the protein being so low, I feel like for my entire life I was trying to push my body from growing. It was like, I put a lid on my body and said, I don't want you to get bigger, I want you to get smaller. And then as soon as that lid was released and I started getting all the nutrients and the food and the protein that I was supposed to get, I feel like my body just finally was like, finally I can grow like I want to grow. And it just blew up in a lot of different areas. But definitely changing, the number of times I ate was huge. And I'm such a creature of habit. I don't get bored of the same food every day. I need that. Like, and so people are like, how do you eat that way every day? And I'm like, well, you're eating chips and cakes. How do you eat like that every day? So it's just kind of, it makes me feel better. And I have a lot of problems because of the surgery with gas and things like that. So I can't eat a lot of gluten, greasy foods, dairy. All those things upset me, even if I wasn't bodybuilding. And so those are things that bodybuilders tend to not put in their diet anyway, because they're bloating. You retain a lot of water. And so the things that I really had to remove becoming a bodybuilder were things that worked with my lifestyle anyway. So it was really a natural fit when it came to nutrition, as long as I started measuring, because that was my big problem in the beginning. Was, I never followed a meal plan. I didn't know what using a scale was. I just thought, oh well, I'm probably close. Yeah, if you don't measure, you're not close. I was no, and like I said, when I said 50 grams of protein, I'm not even sure if it was that much. Like, I'm just guessing. So yeah, that was a huge thing, was measuring. Just knowing exactly what I was putting in my body was, I think everybody should go through a bodybuilding prep, even if you never want to go on stage, or go through 2 or 3 months of tracking everything, because it's eye opening to know what you're actually putting in your body.
Well, I gotta say, it's even more impressive for the Italian American guests that we have on, because food and that. I mean, my great grandma on my mom's side was full Italian, so I'm like an eighth, and then but I'm mainly Norwegian and German. I'm like 50% of those almost, and then just a little Italian. But yeah, just even that side of the family getting together and eating. More props to the Italian bodybuilders, because yeah, that food for Italians, good God, it is.
Well, it's so funny because my dad, he moved here from Sicily when he was 7, so it was like right off the boat Sicilians. My mom was Polish and German, so it was just pasta, bread, from cannoli, from every angle, and that's what I grew up on, which is probably why I'm such a carb lover. But I mean, that was so big. And then when I started bodybuilding, I my one of my or two of my daughters were in Girl Scouts, and I was the Girl Scout cookie mom. So I had like 1,000 boxes of cookies in my dining room every like for probably 2 months at the beginning of my prep last year, and everyone's like, how in the world can you do that? Because I'm a cookie lover. And I was like, honestly, it just doesn't fit my plan right now. So I can turn my head to that, but I could never do that before. Yeah,
I
never.
I remember we would go to my aunt's house probably once a week at least and just have pasta, and it's just, oh yeah, and I love carbs too. I mean, bread is that's my guilty pleasure. I could eat just bread for the rest of my life, and I would be fine. But
Yep.
that's hard for me too. But one thing that a lot of people don't understand, and probably the biggest shock for me that I would have never guessed in a million years, is that for so many of these athletes, posing is the hardest thing. It's harder than your nutrition. It's harder than your working out. I would have never guessed that in a million years, but now after hearing all the guests talk about it, I like to compare it now to being a perfect driver, where you can be a great driver, you can never be a perfect driver. You can be a great poser, you can never be a perfect poser. It's always ever evolving. What has your experience with posing been like?
Just like that. I remember the first posing session I had, I look back and I was like, it's hard to watch because I look so awkward. I mean, it's crazy. And I actually thought I did a pretty good job then. And so looking back, like, people ask me, well, how often do you pose? I'm like, I pose every day. Every time I walk in front of a mirror, I pose. Every time I wake up, when I go to sleep, I don't have just like, an hour of posing every week on a Sunday, which is what we did with my team, which was great because you all got together. But it's like we're also posing every minute of the day. And I'll have like, weeks will go by and I'll pose, everything will feel normal. And then all of a sudden my body moves in one way and something else clicks. And I'm like, oh my God, there's a better position for my lats. So, like you said, you're never a perfect poser. I will continue to learn things. Like I said, I've been posing every single day for the last year and probably longer than that. And I still there's still so much more to correct. I still feel like, oh, why is this so hard, or why doesn't my body turn this way? And so it's a constant work in progress. And that's, I think, for body, and most people who are in bodybuilding know the importance of posing, but nobody realizes how much, like, when we're posing, you're flexing everything at the same time. It's not only exhausting, but you can't sustain that for very long. So when people see my pictures from a show, they're like, well, you didn't look like that last week at work. It's like, well, yeah, I'm not flexing at work, in front of you, all my muscles at once. So it's like, I think people's perception of bodybuilding, what they look like every day and what you look like flexing on stage, is night and day.
That's a misconception that we'll get into shortly, but yeah, that's a huge one for me. But how long did it take you to get that lat spread? Because for so many of our guests, that's the hardest thing to do, and it's the last thing that usually comes in.
I'm still waiting to get it. It's like that is my nemesis. The back pose is so difficult, for me to see that spread. And I think in the beginning, when I was struggling so much with it, I just didn't have any lats. And now I feel like, okay, we've grown my lats, not as much as I anywhere close to where I want them, but a lot more. And so I think that spreads a little bit easier just because I have the muscle growth. But also, just little things like I was lifting my shoulders so much in my back pose as opposed to trying to really, round my back out and spread my lats. So I think it's feeling the way it's supposed to feel before you really get it. Like you just have to keep doing it and doing it. And then videoing, like I record myself so I can see what every little slight movement, what difference that makes the way it looks. So I'm a perfectionist at heart. I'm always trying to make it better. So I think it's just constantly trying to, try different things. I try moving in a way that I don't think is right to see if it looks better. And if it doesn't, well, then it doesn't. But, just trying different things.
I mean, the only thing I can compare it to in my life really is editing these podcasts, because I will never release a perfect podcast. It will never exist. There will always be something that messes up, and then I'll try to edit it out, and then there'll be something else where, yeah, you're never going to get it, but hey, I'll try until the day I die to get a perfect one out. But yeah, that's the same with posing, where it's like, unless you're, just I mean, and there is a handful of people out there that are just gifted with posing where they can just go on stage and wing it, and they have it down. But they are just like those one percenters where they can eat whatever they want and they won't gain an ounce. And I hate those people more than life themselves. And I hope God is playing just a cruel joke on them, and one day they're going to wake up and they're going to be 450 pounds. But hey, that hasn't happened yet. But I can still hope for that to happen. But what is that feeling like when you get to walk up on stage and show off all that hard work that you've worked months upon months on?
For me, it's terrifying. I mean, I get so nervous, and I'm used to, at work, I give presentations to like hundreds of firefighters, so I'm used to getting in front of people. But even when I do that, when it's a subject, I mean, I've been a meteorologist for over 20 years, so I know my stuff. And even when I walk in front of a crowd of people, most of which I already know and been in front of them before, I get my butterflies in my stomach. I start to sweat. I just get really nervous. And the same happens backstage. I start to get a little shaky. And I remember the first time I went on stage. I mean, it was exhilarating. Like, people always tell you to practice smiling when you're posing, in your practice sessions, but I'm not a smiler. I don't smile when I pose. But when you're on stage, it's like you can't help but smile because it's pretty exciting. But I remember the first time I posed on stage, and my legs wouldn't stop shaking, and I couldn't figure out. I'm like, what is going on? They've never shaked in a posing session, even when we posed for like half hour long sessions. I've never gone through that, and I all I can attribute it to was nerves. And so getting on stage for the first time, it was really eye opening. Like, wow, I really need to maybe change the way I practice to not get so nervous. But yeah, for me, it's nerve wracking. I don't walk in heels ever. Like, I just don't. But oddly, walking in the stage heels was easier for me. I don't know why. It was like I put a pair of heels on and I didn't feel like Bambi the first time she tried to walk. So that was a little surprising. But yeah, I really had fun, but it's very stressful for me. Like I'm always, you know, as I'm on stage, I'm more focused on myself and my body and, figure out, am I flexing this? Is this looking right? As opposed to who's in the audience. Like I couldn't tell you who's in the audience. It's like a blur.
Oh yeah, and that's one thing that we hear often too as well. But when it also comes down to, I mean, the other stereotype that I love to bust, and we talked about it a few minutes ago, is so many people in the general public don't realize that that look that you present on stage, that is not a sustainable look. You're not going to look like that 365 days out of the year. And some people try to do it, and unfortunately it does, it's not healthy. Let's just put it out there, it's not healthy, everyone, to be that dieted down and to be that depleted. And people who try it, yeah, they might maintain it for a little bit longer, but it does come with some health problems later on down the line. But what was that experience like for you when you first found out that like, hey, this look that I'm presenting on stage, this is the best I'm going to look for a while, and I am going to have to put on weight if I want to put on muscle. What was that like for you when you started, and has it gotten easier for you to accept that as your career in bodybuilding has gone on?
It was tough when I started that first like off season we had. It was a pretty short off season, but and so I didn't really maybe get as big as I had wanted to at that point. But it was eye opening because I didn't realize that, and I also didn't realize how different I would perceive my body because I was like, wow, I feel fat when to most people, I mean, my body fat was probably 15 to 18%. Like it was still even low for a woman, and I'm like, oh my god, I feel fat. So that perception of because I was so much not, so I had more body fat than I did when I was on stage. And knowing what you're capable of, sure, I'm going to feel fatter because I was fatter, but I'm not like unhealthy at that point. So getting past that, and the scale was a huge thing. Not only the way I looked, but the numbers I saw on the scale. Because we went through my first, I had gained 25 pounds after my first time on stage, and like I said, I was really tiny, so we needed to put on some serious muscle. So I gained 25 pounds in the off season, which I was oddly okay with that. We start prep, and this is my first like official prep, from not being lean to now, being lean. I was like, okay, well, my weight's going to go down because I'm in prep and I'm going to get leaner, and so the number is going to go down. For the first 8 weeks of my 12-week prep, the scale didn't move, not 1 pound, and I gained 25 pounds. I was like, I could only handle it so long before I like flipped out on Shelace. I was like, what is going on? Like, she's like, you're getting leaner. I was like, but the scale isn't changing. So that was eye opening in itself. But I've gotten way more comfortable, like I said, in my own skin, not caring as much what people thought. Um, I now know the process. Now this is, I'm into my second like actual year long. I've been not on stage for over a year. So it's been a very long season to put on some muscle and with that body fat. And I'm okay with it. Like even talking to Shalace afterwards, I was like, she's like, oh, by October, November, you're going to be itching to start prep, and I was like, I don't think so. I think January, after the holidays. And sure enough, January rolled around, and I was like, I'm actually pretty comfortable. Like, so I've definitely been, because, but even now, I'm maybe 15, 18% body fat, still very low, but I'm viewing it differently because also my body composition is changing. I have more muscle than I did last year at the same body fat. So as my body changes, I've just accepted the fact that I can only control what I can control. And that's the work I put in. It's the work, it's my nutrition, it's my workouts, all that stuff. But how my body responds, I just have to let it happen. And that's a big mental block that I've overcome in the last couple of years because so much I was like, well, I'm doing all the right things. Why is it not changing? It's like, well, because it's my body and it'll do it at once.
Well, and that brings me into my favorite question to ask, because so many people don't realize this is so much more of a mental sport than it is a physical sport. And if you were the general public, I can understand why a lot of them would never guess that, because you just look at bodybuilders and it just looks like it's just working out and, going on stage, like I like to say. But, it's so much more a mental game. What was that like for you at first, battling that mental game? Because, I mean, like I said, you can convince your body to work out, but the mental aspect of getting up every single day and just going through the routine and doing it, it's so much more trying on you. How have you dealt with that mental aspect of the sport so far?
It is. It was really hard, and it's harder for me the further I get in prep because I'm now getting leaner. I'm very tired. I'm getting to a part, or a leanness in a body that my body doesn't want to be at. It's not natural. It's not overall healthy for a long period of time. So that's my biggest struggle is the exhaustion because I do work a full time job. I have two girls who are now third grade and sixth grade. I have a blended family with three other kids, so we have five kids, and there's just a lot going on and juggling that and then it's easy to find an excuse of why I can't work out today or why I can't do my meals today. It's very easy. I could find one anywhere. But trying to get out of that thinking and trying to make myself say, okay, this is a priority. I'm going to get my workouts in. I'm going to get everything else done, but I just might have to shift some things around. So it's made me a stronger person for sure. Not only what I can handle, but the way I manage my time. Like it has also taught me that you have time, like, and I still have time in my day. Like even if somebody came to me and said, "Can you do this?" and I say, "Well, I don't have time," I do. I mean, I watch an hour of TV at night. I have time. So it's gotten me away from the excuse type thinking that I used to have, to I can do it. I just have to choose to do it, and I have to enjoy it. Because if you don't like what you're doing, if you don't enjoy the process, it's a waste of time because this is expensive. It's taxing on your body. If you don't like getting to the stage, in my opinion, there's no point to do it. So I really enjoy that part. I enjoy, watching my body change, and that drives me to do the work because I like seeing the progress. I like seeing what I'm doing is making a change.
I was gonna say, if you just like walking up on that stage and you don't like the prep, you're gonna have a miserable life. Like it's gonna be hard for you. And we've had a few guests that have said that, and I just feel so bad for them. But hey, they still stick with it, and more power to them. But we did talk about this briefly, where I mean, if you walk out in public like dressed the way you are right now, you are gonna get stares. You are gonna get people come up and like, oh, how'd you get your arms to look like that? And then especially like you said, as you get leaner and you get sort of that skeleton look, as I like to call it, where you're just gonna get a lot of attention. And I'd like to compare being a bodybuilder, especially a female bodybuilder, but male bodybuilders get it too. You're sort of like a mini celebrity when you go out, where it's just naturally for humans to look at something and be taken aback when it's something that's out of the normal. But how have you dealt with that attention as your career has gone on? Has it gotten easier for you to deal with those looks and that pressure that you might seem that you get when you walk out and a lot of people's attention just focuses on you?
Yeah, I've definitely gotten better at it. I didn't really like notice it too much in the beginning, but a lot of times people will come up to me in the gym, and I've never gotten any negative comments. Or I mean, I've definitely gotten. I can see in their eyes the weird stares, like you're kind of at the end. You're sort of fluctuating between, at the same time, looking like you can tackle a grizzly bear, and yet also somebody's dying to give you a cheeseburger. Like that's sort of the balance you're getting at the end. But I if I were to get any negative comments, or if people make things, the stairs or whatever, I just attribute it to lack of knowledge. They just don't know. They don't know what they don't know. And but I like, even like I said at the water park yesterday, I didn't you don't always realize that you look different because I spend a lot of my time around people who look like me. At the gym, I'm with a lot of bodybuilders, a lot of fit people, a lot of really muscular people. So to them, I feel, small. And then, or maybe, oh, I have a little bit more body fat than, the guy. Like I'll look at guys at the gym and I'm like, wow, is it bad that I look at their back and I want that for myself? So I'm not used to seeing it, but when I get, like, I noticed it at the water park yesterday. I was, in line, I'm looking around and I'm like, I by far am the most muscular person in this entire park. And yet, so I don't always understand that I'm different, but yeah, people will look, and I saw, daughters talking to their parents, like, why? And I heard them like, why can you see her abs? And it's just like, it's funny. And I'm hoping it's inspiring some people, but I just, it really doesn't bother me that much. I don't, like I said, I've never had anything negative. But even, when people ask me positive things, I just, attribute it to, yeah, I look different, and maybe people think it's nice, maybe they don't, but
Well, and
oh
and
well.
and that's awesome that you're doing that. And what are your daughters and what are your other kids' opinions about you bodybuilding?
There, well, I have, so my 2 girls are, well, they're girls, obviously, and then my husband's kids are, it's 2, two high school boys and
Oh.
a middle school girl. So I'm not really sure what they think about it, but, my girls, they loved it. I remember the first time my daughter saw my abs, she said, "I didn't know girls were supposed to have abs. I thought only boys were." And so that was a really good education moment because I was like, "Oh no, you can do whatever you want to do, and muscles are beautiful on everybody." And so it was a really good educational tool. But one thing I've been super diligent about with my kids is, because I grew up overweight. I grew up where my parents would make comments, or things like that. And so I've really not focused on my body the way it looks to them. I focus it on strength. And I say, I go to the gym because they ask me, like, why do you go to the gym so much? I was like, because I want to be stronger, and I like how it makes my body feel, and I want to be healthier. I don't say because I want to be skinnier, or I don't complain. Like when I say I have a little bit more body fat, I don't ever do that in front of the kids because, for one thing, I'm not saying I'm fat, but I can see how they would perceive it. So I try to be really, really um, diligent on that because I know the impact it had on me as a kid, and I don't want that to happen to my kids. But my girls came to, when I won overall at the Mother Load show I did in 2019. They came to the night show, and I obviously didn't know I was going to win. I had no idea what was going to happen. But when I walked off and I had the big trophy, they were just so fascinated by it, like, "Oh my god, mommy won!" And they carried the trophy, and they just thought it was really cool because they're like, "You worked so hard and you won." And I was like, "That's what I want you to take away is that, you know, the working hard part. It may not always, give you the outcome you want. You may not always win, but if you work hard, that's the best you can do." And so I hope that they're taking away some of that stuff.
Well, and that's great too because there've been studies that have shown, the for if your parents are healthy and fit, you are vastly more likely to carry that on as a kid. And it's so great that people are doing that. But now if you could change one thing about the sport of bodybuilding, if they were to walk up to you and say, Gina, we made the decision, you can change one thing about this sport and everyone will go along with it, what would be one thing that you would like to see changed?
Gosh, probably the cost. It's so expensive. I never realized how expensive it possibly could be. I mean, even just a suit alone, I just still can't process why it's so expensive. So if I could change that, I mean, I I've heard people say they want to change the judging and they want things to be, more streamlined, and that would be ideal. But just as an individual, I see things differently. Somebody else is going to see things differently. So the part I can only control what I control, and so I feel like if it were cheaper, I could do the rest of the work. I could do the nutrition, I can do the workouts, and I can bring my best to the stage every single time. And you never know who's going to show up, but if I could take that cost away, I feel like I could certainly do more shows than I wanted to, or maybe make it a little bit easier to do certain shows that I want, depending on distance and things like that. But yeah, it's very expensive, and I wish it wasn't so.
I mean, like I tell everyone who's not familiar, I mean, you're not going to make money doing this sport unless you're like one of the top bodybuilders on the planet. Then, and you'll barely make anything really. You'll cover your gym costs and I mean, unless you get like a sponsor. I mean, yeah, there are so many. Yeah, and that's one thing that I would definitely love to see change as well. But now that we're dealing with the pandemic and things have gotten a little bit better. I mean, it depends on where you're at. I mean, Minnesota, we have done a good job at this where we're only having like 5 deaths a day, and it's the infection rate is still super low. I think it's still like less than 1% has been infected here, and you know. If you're like in Florida and California, it's a different story. But what advice do you have for people because so many people with all this free time that are, either still furloughed or they're just starting to get back to work, a lot of people want to get into shape, I always say, but 90% of those people that want to get into shape, they don't have the tools or the knowledge on how to do it. Because if they had that, then they would be in shape or they would have at least started. But what advice would you have for people that are looking to just get started now? Because now that a lot of people still have a lot of free time, I mean, this is the time to do it if you want to start that change.
Definitely. I mean, and I'll give you my experience of when everything first shut down. I mean, I'm used to somebody who's going to the gym. I'm used to somebody who's eating healthy foods. And the first thing that went through my mind was, as soon as everything shut down, was not, oh God, now I need to stop, or God, now I can't work out. It was like, okay, what can I do to change this? What can I put into place? So there was a local gym who rented weights. So I rented their weights from them. My husband, I had this bar with all the plates, and I was like, okay, I can do deadlifts, I can do rows. I'm like, but I can't do squats. So my husband built me a squat rack. So we had a wooden squat rack I'm like, so it wasn't about like, oh gosh, my goal stops here. It was like, okay, here's all the obstacles that are in my way. How do I break them all down and continue doing what I'm doing? And so that's exactly what I did. There were online programs that I had friends that, we would do stuff with cardio wise whenever I needed it. It was, my coach gave me specific plans for the stuff I had at home. That made it really easy because she's like, okay, what do you have available? Let's tailor things to what you have. And so for me, the transition was seamless. It was like, okay, I'm going down, straight. Now I just made a right. I'm still on a road, but it's a totally different road. Didn't expect the turn, but we're still driving. So what I would tell people is just find a way. There's always a way. There's starting with a coach, especially if you're new and you have no idea what's going on, a trainer, getting your form down, trying to work with you to put a plan in place. But I mean, in the end, it's really all about doing the work. Because I know many people who they say, oh, I wish I had that body, or I wish I did this. Yet given a plan, they won't follow it. So you have to be willing to do the work, because nothing's going to come free to you. You're not going to snap your hands, take a little magic pill, and boom, you have the body of your dreams in 30 days.
And again, if that does, give me a call. I'm more than willing to talk to you. Yeah,
Right?
but
I
yeah,
love that.
that's just so not true. I mean, yeah, it takes hard work and dedication. And, you're really gonna have to pull through to get that. But I always say too, you're lucky because you have kids. Those are human weights that you can use too. Anyway. So hey, for their
Well, they're
punishment,
bigger now, but
for their punishment, that you can be they could be your squat bar or something like that, or whatever. So yeah, that's the one positive out of that. But before we wrap things up, I gotta ask because I mean, I'm a storm guy myself. My dad, he always said if he could if he could have been a storm chaser, he would do it. He loves tornadoes and he loves watching that stuff, and it's interesting to me. But what is the craziest storm you've ever covered as a meteorologist?
Oh gosh, probably. Well, let's see. There's probably two, but one of them is my very first time when I started working with. I worked for American Airlines down in Dallas, and the first time I had gone through my little training, and was on the forecast desk, and there was a big snowstorm in the Northeast, and I'm a tornado girl. Like I love severe weather. I also, when I went to become a meteorologist, which I knew ever since I was like in sixth grade, that's what I wanted to do. But I wanted to be a storm chaser. That was my goal until I realized you don't really make money as a storm chaser. So things changed. But that first storm, I remember like I was on a conference call and they were like, okay, how much snow are we going to get? And I'm like, looking around like at everything I had available. I was like, oh, I don't know, maybe like 3 to 6 inches. They're like, okay, well, there's already a foot on the ground. How much more are we going to get? And I was like, oh my God, like I am so overwhelmed right now. Like just the amount of snow that could fall in a short period of time was mind blowing. And then how much I didn't know. So that was a big one. But then also there was a big like hailstorm in Dallas, and it was during a Mayfest, and it was like softball size hail. So if you're not from the Midwest or the Plains and you have only seen like these little pea-sized hail, we're talking like 16-inch softball size hail, like old school softball, and damaged a bunch of planes, all this stuff, and with the airlines. That was a big one.
Yeah, that's insane. And I mean, the one that comes to my mind, I wasn't even born for, but everyone always talks about it. In '91, we had the Halloween snowstorm in Minnesota, where on Halloween it snowed. Well, it snowed continuously for 2 days, and we had 3.5 feet of snow in October. Everyone always talks about that. I've never been around for that, but I was around for the polar vortex 2 years ago. Oh my God.
Crazy weather.
So
Fascinating
I
though.
had a job at UPS where I had to go outside at night and count all the cars and make sure that everyone, showed up and parked and stuff. And then we had to like go in and check them. It was negative 75 with the wind chill. It was negative 30 without a wind chill. So I had 5 layers on for everything. 5 layers of coats, 5 layers of pants, 5 socks. I had heat warmers and hand warmers. The only thing that I couldn't completely cover is my eyes because I needed to see. I closed my eyes for about 10 seconds when I was out there. My eyelashes froze together. So I had to breathe into my hand and then like rub it into my eye to get them to unfreeze. I was good, but then we had one guy who thought that he was so tough that he'd go out there with like a couple jackets on, and he's like, yeah, F this, as soon as he got out there, and then he just ran right back in. But the worst experience of my life, my car barely started driving, and we thought none of our cars, like, because that's where gas freezes solid, for anyone out there who's wondering, where you're not going to be able to, like, I mean, we've had school days when I was in school where we canceled school literally because it was so cold that the buses wouldn't be able to start to pick up kids. But anyway, so yeah,
And
that's
that happened to me one time at Purdue where it closed down. It was like minus 50. It was ridiculous. But see, this is going to help you when you have kids and they complain about how cold it is. You'd be like, when I was your age,
Oh,
this
it's
is what
definitely a story that I can tell my grandkids too about. I
yeah,
I experienced the polar vortex where I don't know. I mean,
yeah.
like they said, that was the one day where it was colder in Minnesota than it was in Antarctica. So you're like, okay, that's good to know. But yeah, so I couldn't think of a better way to wrap that up. But before we wrap things up, do you have any people that you want to give a shout out to?
Well, yeah, I've already done it a million times. Well, Shelace Shoemaker, my coach, I call her my unicorn because I believe she truly has magical powers. My team Iron and Lace, which has been formed in the last couple of years, it has been incredible with the amount of support and camaraderie we have within that team. For competing, it's just been incredible. My husband, he's just amazing. Jonathan Palma, he's the best. I don't know I don't think I could do this without the support of my husband. If I had somebody who was not only fully supported, but he's truly invested in what I do, and I think that's such a big difference. My kids, they always inspire me, but those are my big ones. My gym, American Iron Gym, best barbell club in Reno.
Yeah, and that's awesome. And I couldn't think of a better way to end this. Can you give us a front double buy? And everyone, she's been
Oh,
working out for Here, I'd say back up just a little bit so
yeah.
we can get the full
Oh,
view. No
plus you got
problem.
to get the full
Yeah, you
Chicago
gotta get the
shirt.
full shirt. I guess Chicago. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's just
There you go.
ridiculous.
There
That's
we go.
just ridiculous.
Most proud of my triceps.
2 years working out. That's just absolutely insane. So, yeah, everyone. I mean, go and give her a follow on Instagram. I'll leave a link down below, and you know. I will buyer beware. Once you follow her, you will be inspired to get off those couches and stop eating those Twinkies. You will be inspired to get in shape. But again, Gina, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your journey. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate that.
Absolutely. So again, you guys, this is Ryan Johnson, DD on the spot, signing out. Have a great day, everyone.